I think anytime we hear a story about leadership, we look at it like it's common sense. But common sense is not common practice. And I think hearing the stories that these leaders provide give all of us a roadmap to being better at influencing other people.
I can't think of a better time to take advantage of the literally hundreds of years of experience that you will glean in a very succinct and practical way through the wonderful stories that are included in this book.
Each chapter in this book represents a different leader who is willing to share and impart their knowledge and wisdom to turn you into a leader.
The stories are inspiring and illustrative, and they offer insightful and practical advice from exceptional leaders who have achieved extraordinary accomplishments, transformations, and change.
I know that I've always found the most important thing I can do is watch other leaders. What makes them successful, and what can I emulate that might make me a better leader?
The personal stories of how individual leaders overcame the challenges that they were facing is going to be most helpful to people.
I think one of the things folks can get out of this book is learning from someone else's mistakes, right? I've learned a lot from my own mistakes along the way, and have been able to share some of that.
These are amazing people with incredible backgrounds, offering their own lessons of experience to all of us.
The biggest takeaway from Lessons from Leaders is that there's a wide variety of leadership styles, and it's important that you find the best style for you and be genuine to yourself.
The more you understand how leadership contributes to the goals and objectives of the organization, the better you're going to be at helping everybody to fit in, participate, and bring their best selves to work together.
Hi everyone, and welcome to today's session. Please let us know where you're joining from in the chat section, and if you have any questions throughout the session for Sam and David. We are thrilled to have you with us for a conversation on leadership, and we look forward to sharing some of the key leadership lessons from the book Lessons from Leaders. Lessons from Leaders is a diverse collection of candid stories from 15 remarkable leaders who share their insights, experiences, and the practical lessons we can all apply to shape our own personal leadership journeys. With that, I would like to introduce you to today's host. Sam Schreiber is the Executive Vice President of Thought Leadership and Training Transfer at the Center for Leadership Studies, the author of From Coach to Coach and the 4 Moments of Truth, and the co-author of Lessons from Leaders. Welcome, Sam.
Susie, appreciate it, and thanks to you and Eric and everybody else on the CLS team that puts these things together. Suffice to say, very, very excited to be talking with today's guests, and also very excited and honored by the fact that so many people are joining us from around the world. So sincere thanks, and can't wait to get going.
I agree, because we also have a very special guest with us today who is one of the extraordinary leaders that shared his story in the book. David Brennan is the former CEO and Executive Director of AstraZeneca plc from 2006 to 2012. He spearheaded the transformation of the pharmaceutical giant into the realm of biologics. He currently serves as the chairman of Alexion Pharmaceuticals, lead independent director of Insmed Incorporated, and is the chair of the board of trustees at Gettysburg College. Thank you so much for being with us today, David.
Well, thank you, Susie. It's a pleasure to be here, and I've enjoyed the interactions we've had with the book with you guys, and especially then when I got to see the stories of many of the other people who contributed. It's been a great experience. So thanks.
Okay, with that, I guess here we go. And why don't we just dive in on the at the end of your introduction there. I'm honored that you were a part of this, David. You and I have known each other, a number of years, and I think I can say this candidly. It's just like everybody that knew you from early in your career is just so gratified that you've achieved what you've achieved. Because in addition to being a very talented person, you're also a very good person. So thank you for that. And on behalf of everybody that I know from your career, over time that is taking part in this. Thank you for all of your many contributions. And you talk about having the opportunity to kind of read what some of the other 14 leaders had to say in this book. Maybe that's a good place to start. Were there messages that you kind of read and kind of took note of and said, but just your impressions kind of, looking at some of the other leaders that you were paired with in the Lessons from Leaders book.
Yes. So thank you for the generous comments, Sam. I appreciate it. And I've always enjoyed working with you throughout the years. My comment about the book Lessons from Leaders and the 14 other stories besides mine is that if you've seen one, you've seen one. That this isn't a cutout that, here is the leadership, here's the key to leadership, and everybody does it the same way. I think when you read through these stories and hear about the experiences people have had, and it's noted several times that having these experiences is what helps to develop leaders, is to have those kinds of experiences is great. And I think, Frances Hazelbean, I've been, reading her stuff for 30 plus years. I mean, she is an icon. Alan Mulally is the guy who's, took over the Ford Motor Company, when it was in the, a deep dark hole, and, the way he did it, the principles that he adapted and brought from Boeing to apply his one with everything I know about leadership on it. That one page is fantastic. I mean, so, and Daryl Davis, I mean, the story, in the book it says, if you only get to read one chapter, read this one. And, there's somebody who single-handedly changed, part of the civil rights world, and, set out deliberately to do it, and how he went about doing it, and the impact that it's had is tremendous. So I think each individual story, kind of, you see how over time it builds on each other for every individual, and how, and that's been my experience in leadership development. It's, there's not a carbon copy. It's not a one size fits all template. It really, with situational leadership, it's the same. You've got to evaluate situations and decide how you want to lead.
Yeah. And let's just pretend that you asked me this question, because I had access, obviously, to all 15 leaders. But in terms of taking a look at what all 15 of you had in common, and we again, the spectrum of folks that we have here, from like a high school football coach and history teacher, to people like yourself that occupied positions where you were in discussion with President Obama about like the future of healthcare when you were, like the CEO at AstraZeneca. Throughout that spectrum, it's kind of like really good leaders. They're thoughtful people. They think about what they're doing. It's not ready, fire, aim. They really take a little bit of time to figure out, the impact of their actions on the individual that they happen to be dealing with, and also on the extended stakeholders.
Yeah.
So they think, right? The other thing is that they have in common in different ways, of course, is that they get people to feel a certain way. They get people, for lack of a better term, whoever that happens to be and whatever the stakes are, they get those folks to trust them. So they think, they get other people to feel. And then when it comes down to the do part of it, as you mentioned it, you've seen one, right? It all is a function of the opportunity, the circumstance, the challenge, and everything else. So I do appreciate your comments, and I know that the three you mentioned will as well. I gotta believe there's people that are viewing this from around the world. And by the way, just for what it's worth, real-time instructions. If you see something on the chat that appeals to you more than the question I happen to be asking you, feel free to just say, Sam, that's good, but I want to speak to this question. But if there are folks, and I imagine there are, that are early in their careers and they aspire to the C-suite, they aspire to achieve, what you achieved during your career, what advice would you have for those people, whatever industry they're in, whatever they happen to be doing for whatever company that they work for, if they aspire to get to a level of strategic and executive leadership, what advice would you have for those leaders wherever they happen to be?
The one sentence that comes to mind is do your best, whether you like what you're doing at the time or not. Over the course of my career, I had a variety of jobs from a management training perspective to get different experiences within the company. And, and I didn't like them all the same, but, but I approached them all the same so that no one would ever know that I didn't particularly care for a couple of those roles and didn't want to do them. I've seen people who, get into a role that they're not happy in, and it shows, and they can't do the workaround to get their mind around the fact that there's something to learn there. There's an experience. There's something important, and you want to be sure you get that while you're in the role. I recall having a role that it was very administrative. I like line responsibility, and it was an administrative job. Managing, I was running marketing operations at Merck International, and had the marketing budget, and I was the budget guy, and all the product managers were mad at me, and and a role opened up, a line role opened up in the Merck ophthalmic business at the time, Chibray International, and I went to the guy I was working for in the operational role, also was responsible for that. And I went to his office and I said, "Hey, can I have that job?" And he said, "Why? I thought you really liked the job you're doing now. I mean, you do a great job at it. You're getting everything done the way we want it done." And I'm like, "Listen, I don't care for this job. Like I've been doing it for a couple of years, and I appreciate the fact that you like the way I do it, but I really want that job over there because that's deliverable. That's client accountability. That's every day you have to show that you've been able to accomplish something." And I think that's the message, Sam, that you have to, bring your best game to the opportunities that get put in front of you, whether they were necessarily the ones that you say, "Oh, that's the one I want, but I don't want that one over there." I moved around, I lived in Chicago, I lived in New Jersey, we lived in Pennsylvania. I went to London for 7 years. I mean, and some, you say to your family, "Let's go to London." They're like, "What are you, nuts?" So, But I think, you've got to bring your best game. That's what I would say. And, I always tried to do that. So from the day I started working at Merck Sharp and Dome as a sales rep and training, to, my last day at AstraZeneca, it was always about trying to get, as you said, thoughtful and careful about what I did, but making sure that we got the results we needed.
Yeah, I just for what it's worth, full disclosure, I struggle with that too. Like what percentage of your job should you be just ridiculously motivated and engaged, to perform? Because chances are there's at least some percentage of what you're being asked to do by the people that you work for that's not going to float your boat, so to speak. But yeah. in the context of employee engagement, it seems like the pendulum has kind of shifted over the years from a standpoint where people really didn't care if you were engaged. It's like you had to do what you had to do, to the point where we're obsessed with employee engagement. And I think maybe on occasion miss the whole idea that if you're not engaged in your job, like, you have something to do with that and some responsibility to put forth there. So that's kind of what I hear you saying, is like, if you aspire to move upwards, whatever it is you're doing, do it to the point where everybody thinks you love it, and produce results. Yeah.
And learn and take it for what learn what you can from it, even if it's not your favorite thing. So make sure you get what you can get from that role that you need to understand and build upon to go forward. Right. So that's, There's always some good in there somewhere. It's easy to say it's bad.
Now, the flip side of that coin, when you became CEO, you got like the big job with a big company. Okay. What, if anything, surprised you by the role, or did you really underestimate, about kind of achieving your career ambition or career goal? Because I think everybody has a tendency to think like, wow, must be cool being up there, or whatever. But what did you underestimate? What advice might you have for people that are seeking that? Kind of beware of this.
Be careful what you wish for. I would say, there's two things that come to mind I was the president of our US and Canadian businesses for 6 years before I was asked to become the CEO of the company. So I'd been on the CEO's staff, he hired me into the job. And so, through my interactions, as a member of the executive team, I had a point of view about what it would take if I had the opportunity to do that job. What would I uniquely bring to that role? And one of the first things that surprised me was how much information, how often executive committee members came to the CEO to talk about decisions that I felt like they should be making. When I was running the U.S. business, I was not having these kinds of conversations with the CEO. But he liked to be involved in things, and so just by virtue of the fact that I didn't, go to him with a lot of problems or issues, I took care of stuff that was on my plate the way I was supposed to. I was surprised when the operations guy came in and started asking me some questions about, doing some things in operations. And I said, I thought you ran operations. Like, what are you asking me for? I don't, I'm not an operations guy. I understand it, but, that's your job. And there were a few examples of that. My predecessor was a scientist. He had run the research and development organization for Zeneca before the merger of AstraZeneca and before he became CEO. And so he was involved in the R&D side of things in a way that, with a business background like mine, I wasn't going to be involved in R&D that way. I had been involved in R&D throughout my career in terms of being the marketing guy or being a group leader for a team that was developing products, but I didn't feel it was my role to weigh in on things like that. I felt like that accountability, and I had to push that accountability down into the organization. One of the first things I did as CEO, I asked the board if I could have a larger grant of authority. So the grant of authority is how much freedom from a financial perspective I had to do things without getting it approved by the board. And there's a financial limit around that. And I wanted to increase that limit tenfold. So I said to the board, listen, I believe as the CEO, I should have more flexibility from a decision-making perspective. And, I'd like to increase the grant of authority. And the person who ran the audit committee said, well, we'll grant it to you, but you're not going to grant more authority to the people in your organization, are you? And I said, well, no, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Like, you give me authority so I can give them authority to hold them more accountable. And it was, a very distinct message that I gave to the organization when the board approved that, to say, listen, I'm pushing accountability down into the organization because I want people to really feel accountable and feel that they have the tools and the authority to make the decisions to move the business forward. The second thing that struck me was how encompassing the job was from an overarching perspective. I just didn't appreciate, how much heart and soul needed to be put into the role. You are the company to the external world. So, you have to be prepared at all times to be the company for whatever is going on. For, you said, about healthcare and President Obama. I chaired the trade association board in Washington of pharma. And I was living in London. I mean, I was flying to Washington twice a month, to be the lead lobbyist, with Congress, during the time of the Affordable Care Act. And, it took a lot of time. It took a lot of energy. And, you just have to be really prepared to be committed in a C-suite job. And as you know, as the CEO, as I said, you are the face of the company for both the people in the company as well as the external world, right?
Yeah.
You have to sit in front of a group of investors who own 12 or 13% of your company, portfolio managers at BlackRock, and one analyst who's asking the questions because they've been meeting for an hour before they bring you in, to put you on the spot and say, listen, we think that you've invested $20 billion in research and development and licensing and business deals over the last few years. Show me the return on investment. Like, what's the productivity on this spend in research and development? And, you go from that to being in the confessional with people and hearing what they really worry about. So.
Feet to the fire, so to speak. Yeah. And I would say again to everybody that's listening out there, I really hope that you buy Lessons from Leaders, because that would be a good deal for us. But and one of the reasons I think it is well worth the spend is that your comments, David, on accountability in that book are as good as any I have ever read anywhere. And I think what you speak to on accountability is kind of the essence of the whole thing. It's like a lot of leadership is taught from the standpoint of, servant leadership and helping people and doing things for them and all of that sort of thing, which is clearly an important perspective. The other side of that is removing accountability from people. When somebody comes to you as the leader and says, wow, I'm in a mess here. What do you think? The minute you're offering perspective, Alan Mulally spoke to this, the minute you're offering perspective, even if it's just a suggestion, you've removed accountability from them. So it can be a difficult thing to discipline yourself to do, but I would think a crucial aspect of leading, especially, at the C-suite level, is you're getting paid a bunch of money to do this thing, to make these decisions. And we're going to sink or swim on your ability to make those decisions in a quality way. This is your thing, and I think that's there's so much there. So much there. And I think it's really different than what you do as a first line supervisor in an organization, where you're more of the coach and the person that's going to help people, develop.
Management leadership are very different. I think, management is, it's about setting goals, tasks, budgets, deadlines, resources, getting things done, more short-term focused than it's about the what, But, leadership is about the why. There's a couple of questions in the chat about how to get employees more engaged. I think, leaders need to be able to describe not just what we need to do, but why we need to do it. And excuse me. And the why is very important, because that's what helps people to be engaged. I mean, being in the pharmaceutical industry, Sam, as you know, we have a strong orientation toward patients, and excuse me, being able to recognize that the work that we're doing could improve the quality and potentially length of people's lives, and that's a high calling, and in the industry, everybody, most of the people in the industry really feel very strongly about the importance of the work that you do, because, it can make a difference in somebody's life, which, is a very meaningful, commitment. But understanding the why is really important. I have my bricklayer story in your book. That people should get it and read it, because it's a reminder of, what we need people to do tasks, but they need to know why they're doing what they're doing. And, putting mortar on a brick and building a cathedral are two different things, even though the function is essentially the same.
Almost exactly. Yeah. Very well said. Cutting in on a couple of questions here. I think for me anyway, like one pandemic a lifetime is plenty, But one of the questions that came in on the chat was what are the biggest challenges for leaders as a result of COVID? from your perspective, you're chairman of the board now, you're still actively involved, and what changed, and sort of, if there is such a thing as a new normal, what are the challenges that leaders have had to overcome and still have to overcome as it relates to COVID?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first part of my answer is about the importance of your ability to change. Leaders need to be adaptable. They need to recognize the situation, and kind of, you need to be able to describe the reality of the situation in a very simple and straightforward way, so that people around you understand the context within which decisions are being made or things are changing. So you have to be able to adapt to change. I know, it sounds, everybody says that, but look at leaders over time and what they have accomplished and how they have changed. And so COVID, the most noteworthy thing is not being in person with people. So the idea of being in a room with someone when you're interviewing them for a job, you get some chemistry. You're sitting there saying, if this person was working for me, are we having a good conversation? If there was a problem, are we, are we getting along reasonably well? And that's much more difficult to do when you're not in person and you don't have that kind of, that in-person chemistry. And I think figuring out the best ways to do that. And I chair the board at Gettysburg College, and I mentor some students. And, in January, I was on with a group of students, and I said, you guys are this is the new frontier. Like, I can't explain to you what you're going through because I never went through it. How are you going to go about getting a job? Like, what is it, that you're thinking you need to be able to do in this new environment? And I think managers and leaders have to do the same thing. And I got, the two boards that I'm on, they're both biotech companies, have really, they've been thriving in the middle of all of this. We've got hundreds of sales reps that are working from their houses. Pharmaceutical sales is a personal selling model. Sales reps go into doctors' offices and into pharmacies. They're out in the field every day, and our people haven't been out in over a year, but we've kept them on. And we've asked them to try to come up with new and different ways to reach out to the customers, the people that they serve, to make sure that patients are being, have access to product, are treated properly. And some people have adapted to it, and some people haven't done very well at it. And, but that's what the new normal is going to be. So let's figure out how we do it. With COVID, the most serious side effects are respiratory problems, right? It's acute respiratory distress syndrome is one of the, most serious outcomes from getting COVID. Who treats it? Pulmonologists. Well, at the company Insmed where I'm on, we have one product, and the target audience is pulmonologists, and they are all so busy with COVID and ARDS. They don't want to see reps. Like, they're like, nah, we don't, like, you can't come to our office. We can't have anybody in our office like and oh, by the way, we're very busy because all of our patients are in the ICU. And, so it's just, I talk to the CEO every week just to catch up with him, see how he's doing. When you're the CEO, it's good to have somebody you can scream at. And, I'm one of the board members who recognizes that. And I call him and I say, how's it going? Like, scream at me. Tell me what you hate and what's going on. Because it's lonely at the top, and you got that you need to do that. I think that at all levels of the organization there should be outlets like that. So I don't, I don't know what the most difficult thing is. I think one of the most challenging things to do is to keep people engaged through this new format of how we are interacting, and making sure that they feel like they've got a voice and that they're being heard. One of the difficulties of leadership is about having the courage to make what I would call unpopular decisions because they are the right thing to do. And it's important that you explain why, if you have to do it. And then it's even more important that you listen to people to get their response so that you're better informed about how your decision is impacting people. And you know, it's easy, I think, to rationalize that it's hard to do because we're not together, and that's exactly the wrong answer. That's what there's more reason to do it because we're not together. That, you know, that's the reason to do it more often. So
you got to figure it out. Yeah. The question came up a while ago, but I think it plays in here pretty nicely. Somebody had asked about the ethical dilemmas that you face when you're making professional decisions. And just in general, without, like, you can pick your specific or your frame of reference on that, but in general, from a leadership standpoint, when you start talking about ethical considerations, right, gray area maybe, okay, but how you approach those sets of circumstances as you're solving problems for the business that's in the middle of whatever the business is in the middle of. Is there any general advice or general perspective that you have based on your experience that deals specifically, to this person's question?
I would say that ethics and conscience, as a leader, ethics and conscience are not optional. They are glue. They hold together a lot of what you do, and especially ethics and conscience. You said it at the beginning, is about, you need to be thinking about what you're doing and thinking about the impact that it might have. And, sometimes you think you're going to say something or do something, and you expect a certain thing to happen as a result of that. You have to have sensing mechanisms in place to understand what the impact really was. So you pull the lever, you think this is all going to happen now, and then it doesn't happen. You have to know that that's going on, and you have to know why it's not going the way you thought it was going to go. So, and on the ethical side, I mean, in the pharmaceutical industry, ethics is mission critical. Think about running clinical trials. Think about informed consent from patients, who went in for the vaccine, people who entered, the vaccine clinical trials. Each company ran with 30,000 patients. 15,000 of them got placebo. Because they had to have a chance to later to find out. But put me in the trial and let me know later whether I got placebo or the vaccine. And because you got to show that the vaccine works. And all of a sudden now, well, the vaccines are available. It's an emergency use authorization, but they're available. So now, is it ethical to run a clinical trial giving placebo shots when there's a vaccine available? Like, I don't know, the people that are listening to this, do you want to enter a clinical trial to prove one more company's drug might work or might not work? I mean, and it's just an example of, the kinds of challenges that organizations are faced with and have been faced with COVID. All these antibodies that have been, tested for COVID patients to see if they even work. I mean, it's, the ethical dilemmas, you face ethical dilemmas in a number of different ways. I say, in the industry, and the heart of the research-based pharmaceutical industry is based in research and development. It's about science. And you have to have people that really know and understand, what the risks are and what the opportunities are to develop drugs. It's not everybody knows it's not a simple task. I would just say to you and to your audience, the development of a vaccine in less than a year, much less 3 or 4 vaccines in less than a year, is unprecedented in this industry. I've been in the industry for 40 plus years. Never, ever have we ever seen anything like this. The closest we came was with AIDS in the early 1980s. And that was a partnership between academia, the government, the private industry, and anybody else that could participate. And it took 5 years to get the first treatment for AIDS in the early 1980s. And so to see this happen in less than a year is just, it's a tremendous accomplishment that, it's underappreciated, I would say, by a lot of people.
Yeah. Another one of the leaders that we had in the book, a guy named Brett Williams, the title of his chapter is "Leadership is Vague." And it just always struck me, especially as you're talking about, some of the things that you're talking about here ethically and the big picture decisions that leaders of consequence make. If it was easy, everybody could do it, right? But you're going to be judged, right? that's kind of what you signed up for, and you just, there's a discipline associated with getting through it. And by the way, don't blame me for this. A lot of these questions are coming in on the chat here, so I don't want this to come across like some kind of sort of 60 minutes deal here.
Yeah.
I think this is it's a great question. What leadership lesson did you learn during your career from a mistake or a miscalculation that you made, or that the group of decision makers made? But you personally as a leader, like how do you take something that didn't turn out the way you wanted it to, and sort of put that into a set of circumstances where it becomes part of your leadership fabric moving forward? Anything jump to mind that you'd be comfortable sharing with the crew here today? I refer to our audiences there.
There's one in the book about when I first became a sales manager out in Chicago, and my drive to make people better as salespeople. And I got into a situation, and you can read it in the book, with a gentleman who I drove to, along with extenuating circumstances on his side, but I kind of drove him to the edge, and almost lost him, and ended up taking him into an emergency clinic on a Saturday night to be evaluated. And he came out a couple months later and quit, and called me the biggest asshole he had ever worked for. And I recognized that I had been pushing him, and it just, I was task oriented, and I was not sensitive to some other issues that were going on in his life, which I didn't have knowledge of at the time until afterwards. And I had a similar experience a bit later in the Astor Merck days, where a woman that I worked with in marketing, who I thought I was close with in terms of being able to work together, broke down crying once on me. And I said, but I asked you about that. I asked you before I did it, are you going to be good with this or whatever? And she said, you asked me, but you didn't want to hear me. You didn't want to listen to me. It's difficult to talk to you when you come on the way you come on sometimes. Like I don't know how to deal with you when you're pushing something to get it done, and I don't feel like my voice is being heard. And I remember that to this day as vividly as I remember the experience in Chicago, where I recognized that I was pushing, not in a negative, I didn't think it was in a negative way. Some people perceived it that way, but for someone as nice as her, she was just like, I can't talk to you sometimes because you're not listening. And I thought, man, that's, it was a great lesson. It was one of the best lessons, actually. I think
yeah.
You said it at the beginning. As a person, you consider me a thoughtful person, and but I had a bit of an edge to me for a while. That I worked for an Australian guy at Merck, who was very successful. Being Australian, he usually got right to the point. And he walked into my office one February with my bonus check, and he held the bonus check up like this, and he held it and put it in front of me, and he said, "This is your performance appraisal. You don't suffer fools gladly, and you better get over it. Here's your bonus." That's all he said to me. He said, "You don't suffer fools gladly, and you better get over it." I thought, man, this guy's smart.
there is a message here. I will say this much, and I do have the benefit of of knowing you for a number of years, and in terms of accountability, another thing you speak to is the whole idea of holding yourself accountable. For doing the absolute best job that you can do. You signed on for something, and a couple of your stories have mentioned it already. But there's a bunch of great athletes that are really crappy coaches, right? There's a bunch of great salespeople that just really never make it as sales managers. That's a huge transition.
Yeah.
You go from a set of circumstances where you're doing everything you can possibly do in your territory to represent the organization and drive your numbers. And then you have somebody that's reporting to you that has maybe even more talent than you had, but just from a drive perspective, from a proactive, preparation, all that stuff, it's just not there. It's a really difficult hurdle, I think, emotionally, to get over as a first line supervisor, and a huge lesson there. A couple other people a little while ago, they were talking about, wow, where does emotional intelligence fit into this? And but it wasn't 10 years ago that people in corporate learning functions, emotional intelligence, that really wasn't something that a company was going to invest in. That was more of a outside the organization. Now, and I think obviously, right, it's embedded in your effectiveness as a leader. So if you have somebody on your staff that feels uncomfortable sharing information, that's your problem, right? That isn't.
Absolutely. If they can't share the problem with you, I'm the problem. That's not their problem,
Yeah.
And I used to think it was the other way around. I gave you every opportunity and you didn't do anything about it. She said, "Oh no, you didn't. You didn't listen to me." No, you don't. No, you say that, but that's not how you act. And I thought, geez,
I got to take a look here. You mentioned it a little bit, and boy, I would be intrigued with it, and I think the rest of our listeners would as well. You do a lot of work with kids, colleges. What is kind of the extended vibe there? First off, say what you want to say about some of the things you're doing at Gettysburg College and other places, but in terms of taking a look at the ability of younger generations to cope with COVID and also to figure things out and get creative, give us some news about the future. What is it? What do you see in there in colleges from emerging leaders, so to speak?
I was on with a young lady yesterday for close to 45 minutes, maybe closer to an hour. I forget, it went so fast. It was such a good conversation, and it was kind of her dime. Basically, the career office asked me if I would make time available if students wanted to talk to somebody who graduated from the college, went on and had a business career, and they're just curious to understand some of it. And we got into a discussion about differentiation, because to me, marketing is differentiation. How do you differentiate your product? How do you, the best strategy is changing the game, doing something that nobody else does, and you get all this credit for having a great strategy. But I was discussing with her, how do you differentiate yourself to a prospective employer when you graduate next year? Like, what if I were interviewing you right now and I say, well, why should I hire you? Why shouldn't I hire the next person, who's got a better resume, I think, than you have? What are the things that you as an individual, I said to her, are going to bring to this that will make me want you to be there because of what you do and how you do it. And it led to a very interesting conversation about curriculum, academics, and then co-curricular activities. What are extracurricular activities that are not in a classroom that teach you about leadership? There's a leadership center at Gettysburg College, the Garthwaite Leadership Center. Are you part of that? Like, do you recognize that that's for leaders, for people? It's not a course. It's an experience. It's for people who want to go into politics, people who want to go into business, and people who want to go into public service. It's the same leadership organization there. It's not a course. It's just an offering from the college for you to, while you're there, to experience leadership in some way. And so I think, so that's what I say to students is, make sure that you, just like I said a few minutes ago about get from any job that you're in the most you can get from it. While you're at school, get the most experiences that you can get, because that's going to it's going to inform your leadership style as it develops over time, right? We've got a cliche: leadership is not a destination; it's a journey, and you journey throughout your career, and your style changes based on experiences you have, things you learn, stuff that works, stuff that doesn't work, etc. And it's I think for people that are early on in their careers, or in college especially, boy, take advantage of stuff outside the classroom. Do well in the classroom, yeah, but recognize that life is not a classroom. It's a set of real life experiences that you're going to be out and about. College teaches you how to learn, and you need to know how to learn for the rest of your life. So make sure you really have to understand that.
Take that and apply. Yeah, we've talked a little bit about the whole idea of like leadership at the supervisory level, maybe more coach intensive, and you have experience that other people can lean on so that you can accelerate their development as a rep or an athlete or whatever it happens to be, and how that's kind of a different thing, at the C-suite level, where it's like, okay, I don't, I know something about what you do, but I certainly don't know everything, and I'm not going to give you advice here. This is kind of what you're being paid to do. So how, if you take those two layers in organizations, what's leadership in a boardroom like? What's it like when you're, on a board, chairman of the board, as you are, sort of the steward, if you will, of, an organization, just in general, because I think most of us probably won't have that opportunity, but what goes on behind those doors, and what does that look like? And, how are the dynamics different, if at all?
That's a great question. So the board, the two boardrooms I'm in, where I chair one and I'm the senior independent director in the other one, which is the chairman without the title, because you still need to, you have to run, the board has to run without the CEO present at times. And so if you're CEO and chairman, then you got to have a director like me who's basically can say, all right, let's kick the CEO out and have a board meeting. But most board members have C-suite experience. They're executives at heart. That's how they've come to, and they've been successful executives for the most part at what they have done. And as the chairman of the board, one of my primary responsibilities, and as the senior independent director, is to keep the board from acting as the executive team. So you get a bunch of people that have been executives, they get on the board, and they think they know how to run the company. And that's not their job. And so there's a subtlety to leadership at the board level that it's really important to be sure that everybody understands that that's the expectation, and that if in fact a board member crosses the line in some way, then it's the chairman or the senior director's responsibility to talk to that board member and point out to them, that they might have stepped over the line from an executive perspective. I had it happen to me when I was the CEO. I had an independent director, independent chairman, and I had one particular board member on a particular issue that had in mind the way something should get done, and it wasn't the way I saw it. And after the board meeting, when it happened, I said to the chairman, "That guy crossed the line. Like, if you're holding me accountable, then that's my decision to make, not board member. Like, you need to tell that guy, that's David Brennan's decision. That's not your decision. You can advise, you can give, you can talk, make a suggestion, but I said to the chairman, unless you want him making those decisions, in which case, I'm out of here, because
yeah, you don't need me.
It's not a threat. It's I want to respect the board, but if they lean in on an executive decision that the CEO thinks is within their purview and their rights to do, then they can hear the advice, but ultimately decide, because they're accountable for the outcome. The board member is not, and board members generally understand that. And so leadership at the board level is to trust and verify. That's what I would say. You've got you got an executive team in front of you. They're talking about their marketing plan. They're talking about what they need to, how much money they need to put a sales force on the ground to introduce the new product. And, so there's a budget, but you've got to be able to ask some questions to get comfortable on behalf of the shareholders. Remember, board member, you represent the shareholders. You're not there to make management feel good. You're there to make sure that the shareholders that you represent are represented and would believe that, you did trust, but you verified what it was you were trusting to be sure that when you go to CEO school and they give you the secret decoder ring, and you finally decode it and figure out what your job is to CEO. One of the things that it says is make sure you know how to ask good questions. Not a lot of them, because you send the organization tumbling. You ask what time it is, and people go build watches and clocks, and hey, I just didn't have my watch on. I was wondering what time it is. But you've got to be able to do a deep dive. You have to be able to show the people in the organization at that level, your executive team, that when to go down in the rabbit hole with them and get into some real details. I'd be reviewing budgets. The R&D guys come in, they say, well, we put forward a budget of $4.2 billion, but we're only getting allocated 4.1. And that other 100 million that we're not getting is really going to be, that's bad. We really need that. And I'm like, I'll tell you what, let's do this. Before we talk about the last 100 million, let's go through the first 4.1 billion that you're spending. I want to look at a line item level on everything that we're spending on before we say, should we add 100 million to it? And that's when they go, you know what? I think the 4.1 is probably going to work fine. We don't want you down at a line item level in my budget. So, but so trust and verify, but you have to know how to ask good questions, and you don't want to ask so many questions that it drives the organization into paralysis analysis. That was kind of a bureaucratic way to do things when I was a product manager. Keep asking questions. That's what, get get your analyst over there to answer these 4 questions before we take the strategy forward. Like, bang.
Yeah. No. Well, I tell you, it's just like if you're in that room and you're on a board, you're surrounded by people that are used to making decisions and being rewarded for it and having opinions. And I would imagine the orchestration of that from a teamwork standpoint and a role clarification standpoint is a very arduous task, to say the least. Had kind of approaching our bewitching hour here, but a couple of thoughts from your perspective. There were several questions that came up in the chat on executive decisions and positions and things like that on everything that is diversity, equity and inclusion, sort of the role that is playing today, and sort of maybe how that's different than in years past, and kind of what are some of the practices and things or the focus that you have had or been a part of in the context of that running organizations.
Yeah. This has become, in the last few years, a much more talked about topic in the boardroom than it was in prior years. Part of it is, interestingly enough, is because investors have their governance groups that review with the portfolio managers that make the investments what good is the company that you're investing in doing? Are they, is it diverse? Is it inclusive? You don't have to go far to find now that ISS and Glass Lewis, who are the 2 most well-known proxy advisors in the United States, have stated that if boards do not have at least 1 female representative on their board starting next year, the company will recommend against voting in favor of the director who's in charge of nominations and governance. Now, it's a non-binding vote, but it's indicative of how your investors feel about how you as a company are going forward on just at a board level. At a company level, it's much different. You know, one of the roles of the CEO is to speak the unspoken, to talk about things that make people uncomfortable. And I think, you know, recognizing that we need to have a more, you know, a more diverse organization starts at the top. You got to be able to talk about it. And not everybody necessarily agrees, but if you make it part of the conversation, things start to happen. And I see that in both of the companies where I'm on the board. The CEO is the person who has brought to life diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. The fourth part of that is making people feel like they are being heard. They're not just being represented. They are part of the solution that you're seeking to create. And it takes guts to bring that up, especially in a larger organization where you look around different countries, they have different norms, different cultures treat people differently, and you need to have a philosophy and a principle within the company that can operate globally. And so it's quite doable. And culture is really, really important in a company. Culture is it's the lifeblood of an organization. Culture is what people do when nobody's around. That's how do they operate? How do they really feel about the company when they don't have to pretend. So I think it's a topic that is mission critical, more so now than ever. I think younger people, compared to the 40 years ago when I was in the industry, this was the beginning of an issue, but compared to today, it was minuscule. Today it's much more important for everybody to recognize, especially for people graduating from college. I'm on the admissions team at Gettysburg as the executive on the just oversees the process and see how things are going. Boy, building a diverse class that is representative, both, you pick it ethnically, religiously, LGBTQT, whatever it is described. It's very, very important to acknowledge all of that and say we need to have a class that represents what the world is going to look like. And, the world's different. Again, it's about leadership and change, being able to change how you do things to adapt to the environment.
Yeah, and I think in closing, if it wasn't for change, people would care a whole lot less about leadership, and that's kind of there's more of that in the future. And so many comments in here talking appreciatively about you being candid and answering questions and sort of digging deep and from the heart and all that stuff. And I'm not surprised by that, a bit given our history together. Yeah. But on behalf of everybody that attended, everybody at the Center for Leadership Studies, I just want to say I was honored to have this opportunity, and I thank you very much. And if you can learn, everybody out there can learn. Like take a look at what you're doing and adapt and kind of just keep focused on learning the next thing and trying the best you can possibly try. Any final words, sir?
I think the idea of doing the interviews with the leaders was brilliant. I know you and Susie and Eric spent an awful lot of time on it. I thoroughly enjoyed my interview, but I even more so enjoyed the outcome when I saw the rest of the book and some of the videos from some of the interviews you've done. So I think it's great. And if you want to get some good insights, into different styles and approaches and ways to do things, I'm going to be a ham and say I like the book, not just because I'm in it, but because reading about some of these other people and what they've experienced and accomplished is just tremendous.
Well, I appreciate it, sir. And I guess Susie, at this juncture, we'll kick it back to you. Thank you again very much, David.
Thank you, Sam and Susie and Eric.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. This was an incredible hour. And David, specifically to you, thank you for sharing your insights on so many different topics. To learn more about David Brennan or Lessons from Leaders, please visit lessonsfromleadersbook.com. Also, if you're interested in joining future events, LinkedIn Live events, please register on the Center for Leadership Studies LinkedIn company page. Thank you all so much for your time.
This book will give you a wide array of really interesting, thoughtful, and practical ideas from some incredibly wise people.
It provides such a rich variety of leadership journeys from so many great leaders with different backgrounds, experiences, and areas of focus and service.
I think you're going to find this entertaining, it's going to be practical, and it's lessons from leaders that you can take back and use.
Pick up a copy of Lessons from Leaders.